Hey folks, have you spent any time looking into the historical and theological entanglements between Freemasonry and Christianity? How about the influence of Freemasonry on the state? This is not a topic we have covered before, so I invited Scipio Eruditus on the show to discuss this and much more.
Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Hargis.
Scipio, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting talk. I'm largely ignorant on this topic, but it's a topic that is fascinating to me. And if I happen to see a documentary on it, I'll probably stop and watch it. And I'd like to know if I'm a little skeptical watching stuff like that on TV because you don't know if you're being told the whole truth. But you were connected to me by our mutual friend, Michael Gaddy, and I have a great amount of respect for that man. And if he recommended you to me, then I feel like I'm going to get all the truth I can get from you out of this. So that was cool that he was able to get this, get us connected, get this topic going.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's, I mean, if you're seeing it on TV, you're definitely not getting the whole truth. That's for sure.
It's usually the case with just about everything that comes off the television. What I like to do, since your first time on the show, I'd like to get some background from you. Just whatever you want folks to know about you. Then we're going to dive into this and try and get whatever we can out of you on this topic within an hour's time, because from what I just read, just the one article you sent me from your Substack, I feel like you could go much deeper, and I think you do go much deeper in other articles on this stuff, but we're going to get as far as we can into it. But why don't you give us a little background of yourself and we'll get into it.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. So I'm Scipio Eruditus, a pseudonym I write under at Substack.com. And so I have at this point, over 100 long-form essays. I think it's just the best format for really getting ideas out and thinking through some of these really heady topics.
Right.
You know, a little bit about myself. I'm an Air Force veteran. I, served in Afghanistan. And for me, that was a really big paradigm shift. Obviously going to war is going to change someone, but it was not just going to war, which I think, and, I largely mentally prepared myself for that, but it was the reality of the situation on the ground, right? And so until that point, and I had signed up, in the aftermath of 9/11, because like so many other people, I wanted to get revenge and I wanted to fight for my country, and I thought I was fighting for freedom and, all the crap they tell you on TV, right? And you get over there on the ground and you realize, oh, well, this is a very different story than I was told. And, I'm certainly no von Clausewitz, but it doesn't take a tactical genius to realize that what we were doing in Afghanistan was never going to work. And the more and more I read on the subject and the history of the Afghani people, I mean, they are a notoriously unconquerable people. And some of the greatest generals in all of human history, from Alexander to Attila the Hun, have not been able to subdue them. And so the idea that the American army was going to walk in there and was going to sell them on Coca-Cola and jeans and feminism and homosexuality and the rest of the stuff that the American government pushes now, well, that was extremely diluted, frankly. And so it was a really big wake-up call for me, because I realized, wow, the amount of lies, the depth of the lies that were being sold. And I was in Afghanistan from end of 2011 to mid 2012. And so this is some of the most intense fighting period. Actually, there was like a resurge in the Taliban forces during this time period. So we had more contact and more kinetic actions during this time period, 2009 to 2012, than during the initial invasion. I mean, it was there was essentially an entirely new war happening. And meanwhile, on TV, you're being told that, hey, everything's honky-dory, guys. It's all great. We're bringing democracy. Democracy is being unleashed on the Middle East. And couldn't be further from the truth. And so that was really a wake-up call for me. I was like, wow, the government, certainly, the government lies, right? But it's the depth and the scale of the lies obviously made me question a lot of things. And so, I just started researching and reading. And for me, one of the initial forays in this topic of conspiracy theories, quote unquote, as they call it. But, I like to say conspiracies aren't a theory, they're a felony. And the reality is that you just go and you read history, you read some books, and the conspirators are more than willing to talk about this stuff. We're gonna be talking about Freemasonry primarily today, but that's one of the things I really enjoy, as a historian and studying this subject, is because the Masons are so prideful, and they will brag about it, and they will tell you over and over and over again, and they love taking credit for it. So my initial foray into this topic was through 9/11 and building 7. Interesting what happened there. We won't entirely other rabbit hole, to go down, but just kind of went from there. Now, on the subject of Freemasonry in particular, around this same time, after I'd left the Air Force, I joined a fraternity called Phi Gamma Delta, Fiji for short. Now, I'm no longer affiliated with them. I've disaffiliated with them. I totally disavow. Fraternities, they're basically just a gateway drug into Freemasonry. And as I learned doing, study of my former fraternity, all of the founders of Fiji would go on to become Freemasons, and a bunch of our initiation process was held in a Masonic lodge. A bunch of our secret oaths and handshakes and symbols, the hand sign. I mean, this is all like ripped straight from Freemasonry, as I didn't know then, but I know now. And so our initiation ritual, I wrote about this in an essay titled "On a Response to a Mason." So very early on in my writing career, I had a Mason reach out to me, and he, claimed to be a Christian, and he said, there's no conflict between Freemasonry and Christianity. And I have a very different opinion of that, obviously, right? And I think one that is informed by Scripture and the history of the Masonic religion in general. And so our initiation for Fiji was held, unbeknownst to me, at a Masonic lodge. And so, I mean, it's still gives me chills to this day thinking about it, because we'd been hooded and sent to driven off to a secret location. And so, as I go through the step, the threshold of the door, I am like almost electrified, right? It was paralyzing, and I can just feel, I don't know how to describe it, right? Not to get, too, woo-woo here, but I could feel the presence of evil. I knew I was somewhere very evil. And it was not until, we were led up the stairs, we entered in through the basement, went up the stairs into the whole Masonic lodge, and, inside the temple, and we did the whole initiation ceremony, but they rip off your hood during one part of it, and just, again, this is a carbon copy of Masonic rituals. And we go through this, this process, and I see all these symbols, right? I see the checkerboard floor, the black and white checkerboard, a symbol for duality, good and evil, light and darkness, and the fusing of these two things, right? The dialectic. And I had no idea what any of this meant, right? I saw the all-seeing eye, and I kind of knew that was, like an Illuminati symbol, but I didn't really know too much about it, right? I was like, I recognize the all-seeing eye, but I don't know what the rest of this is. But I was very shook by that experience. And so, just a kind of long story short, right? That's what led me down the exploration of Freemasonry, and really, diving into the history of this institution. And I've always loved history, and it is staggering to me, looking back now at so much of the history that I read, how you can write about the last 300 years of history and not include the Freemasons. They are a pivotal player in the creation of the modern world. And there's a very good book on this subject by John Dickey, The Craft, How Freemasons Made the Modern World. That's not a conspiracy text. That is like a mainline history text. And, he's obviously not coming at it from, a critical or an adversarial light. But there's, a lot of writing about this. And there's a lot of good documented scholarship and history. I mean, we're not talking conspiracy texts here. I generally try and stick to, scholarly material when we're discussing these subjects, because there is a plethora of it. That's kind of, who I am, right? And, what led me to, research and look into some of this stuff.
Now, what I found interesting when I was reading your article, in the very beginning, you said that this article was you wrote it back in 2023, if I'm remembering correctly, but you said it was a difficult article for you to write, and you kind of explained because of your time in the military, and you considered yourself a patriot. You even called yourself an American chauvinist at one point too. So learning this stuff about Freemasonry, it sounded like it kind of shook you a little bit. and it just really kind of it helped the scales fall off your eyes on what you believe, from what you were believing before. And I just thought that was an interesting point that you brought up in the article.
Yeah, it was an absolutely major paradigm shift for me, and has forced me to look at the Constitution and the founding of this nation in a much more critical light.
All right, well, let's start here because you start right off at the beginning of this article with 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, 7 through 12. And you focus on the word mystery. And I think this is a good starting point. And obviously you started your article with it as well. But with the word mystery, you said that the cornerstones of the U.S. are laid up on that mystery known as Freemasonry. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit? Because I think this is going to kind of help lead into everything else that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so this has really been one of the major kind of threads of my writing, has been the subject of Freemasonry. And, I'm going to start with a quote here from Charles Francis Adams. This is the son of John Quincy Adams, who would become a vociferous anti-Mason. But Charles says, "A more perfect agent for the devising and execution of conspiracies against church or state could scarcely have been conceived." And when we talk about Freemasonry, and we consider really what it is as an institution, it is staggering how well-crafted these societies, secret societies, are for propagating conspiracies against the state and against the church. Obviously, having an elite group of men sworn to secrecy, often on very bloody and gruesome oaths. I'll certainly read one of them if we have the time, right, for the Master Mason ceremony, where they threaten to, be cut in half and have their ashes scattered to the wind. I mean, these kind of oaths repeat for all the different ranks of Freemasonry. And ultimately, the Masonic religion is just an expression of a much older religion. Now, there are many Freemasons who will admit to this freely, right? There are many occultists who will claim the same. And so, and when we discuss Freemasons, the thing is, you do have to be somewhat discerning about their own proclamations, claiming people were Freemasons or other people weren't, because they are vociferous liars. And, the issue here, of course, right, is that some of it is truth, some of it is lies. I think generally when we look across the testimony of, the various occult sects and religions, that there is a strain of truth to the claim that they are making here, that this is just an expression of a much older religion. And that's not because we're taking their word for it, but that we can look at the symbols, the rituals, the general milieu in which these things are expressed, that they certainly have parallels, and in many cases direct parallels, to ancient Egypt and ancient Babylon. And so I think ultimately that is the mystery religion that is being expressed here, the mystery religion of Babylon, or Babel, right? And so much of this flows from these two kinds of fonts, both Babylon and Egypt. And much of Babylon's esoteric knowledge was actually gained from Egypt. And so this is why you see in so many Masonic temples, there is just a plethora of Egyptian symbolism and imagery. And probably the most famous Masonic symbol is the unfinished pyramid, right? Which obviously you see on your dollar bill. I mean, you just look at the dollar bill and it's chock full of Masonic imagery. And so that unfinished pyramid within, Masonic imagery and this general occultic imagery, right? That symbol goes back much further than them. It is a symbol for the unfinished work, right? It's called the great work, which is the perfection of man. Essentially the theosis and the divinization of man outside of God. So they think and they believe that man can perfect himself through his own will, his own work, whether this is magical or technological or purely philosophical means. Obviously there's disagreements amongst the various sects, but the end goal of all of the mystery religion is for man to become gods. And so this is really the oldest heresy, right? This is the same temptation that the serpent tempted Eve with, right? Ye shall be like gods. And so really that original rebellion has been instantiated in this religion. Of course, they are not going to acknowledge it as such. And in much of their literature, it's actually Satan, or Lucifer, who is the good guy, right? He rescued humanity. He freed them from the tyranny of Yahweh. I mean, this kind of notion is very common in occultic literature. And so Freemasonry also admits to this, right? Not that they're, they don't admit that they're worshiping Lucifer. I mean, some of them do, actually. we'll read that quote. But, that they are the expression of the ancient religion. And so Christianity, right, as we perceive it, this is a corruption. And so there is a much more pure religion that has been carried through by the elect in these ancient signs and symbols. And this is how Albert Pike puts it. This is from Morals and Dogma, just a gigantic tome, very boring, most of it. But he says, Masonry, like all the religions, all the mysteries, Hermeticism and alchemy, conceals its secrets from all except the adepts and sages, or the elect, and uses false explanations and misinterpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled, to conceal the truth which it calls light from them, and to draw them away from it. Light being, the truth here, Masonic symbolism. And so this is the other difficulty, and I bring this quote up, quite frequently when discussing this subject with Masons who like to push back on me, is that according to their own writings, the symbols and the pageantry of these lower level rituals are intentionally deceptive. So you think it's about Hiram Abiff, and it's about not giving up Masonic secrets, but in actuality, there is a much deeper symbolism going on here, right? And so the story of Hiram Abiff, who is a real biblical character, but obviously the claims that they make about him and other biblical figures are entirely pulled out of thin air, right? There's absolutely no evidence that Hiram Abiff was a Freemason. He was an operative Mason, an actual Mason, right? But like an esoteric occultist, right? I mean, absolutely no proof for this, or Solomon, or the rest of it. Some will claim that Solomon was the first Freemason. Others will claim Hiram Abiff was, and he taught Solomon. There's some disagreement, but within the Masonic myth, right, Hiram Abiff is a central, a key figure. And so he is accosted by three individuals to divulge the secrets of Masonry. And he refuses to do so. And he is murdered. And then after 3 days, he comes back to life. Now, and this is part of the Master Mason initiation. So once you get to the third degree, where the vast majority of Masons will stay, right? And I always like to, preface and make the statement. There's, tons of people, their dad, their grandpa, my granddaddy was a Freemason. I'm not saying your granddaddy was evil or that he was worshiping Satan, wittingly. I believe that most Freemasons are, deceived. They've been duped, and a lot of the good people who join this fraternity, if you can say that they are basically the cloak that the much more evil figures use to shield themselves from scrutiny, right? They can say, oh, we do charity and we do X, Y, Z. I mean, okay, cool, right? Like, that doesn't excuse all the other stuff. So this is a very convenient shield that they use, right? And most people within the fraternity have no idea. People are scouted. And it's only those who are amenable to these kinds of doctrines and this kind of esoteric thinking who are then initiated into the higher ranks. So I would argue that no one below 33rd degree really knows what's going on. They might have, a small idea, but until you reach the top of the pyramid, right, you are largely ignorant of what is going on here. So, that is, in my estimation, really, when we look at the history of Freemasonry, it is the expression and outgrowth of this ancient mystery religion, and really the original rebellion against God.
Man, that's pretty deep. That's a lot. But it's like I said, it's something that I'm fascinated by. It's a topic I'm fascinated by. I want to talk about this a little bit too, because I kind of go back to like the American founding. Okay, and this is something that I don't know. I think people talk about it. They know about this, but 9 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were confirmed Freemasons, with 7 of the signers suspected of membership, as its primary author, President Thomas Jefferson. Now, and then 13 of the 39 signers of the Constitution were known Freemasons, and 74 generals of the colonial army being Freemasons as well.
Well, 33 of the 74.
Oh, 33 of the 74. Okay. And then colonial army being let's see, 15 of our presidents have been known Freemasons, and George W. Bush was the last president holding office with an openly known secret society membership, that of Skull and Bones. Now, when I finished reading your article, there's some, you had people commenting underneath, and this guy had a question. I thought it was an interesting question too. I'm going to paraphrase it, but going back to like the Revolutionary War, from Great Britain to, or from England to America, they asked, was it just brothers? If they're all Freemasons, was it just brothers fighting brothers in this Revolutionary War? I thought that was an interesting question, and I don't remember everything that you said to me, but I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. Knowing what we know about the Declaration of Independence, Freemasons were involved with the signing of some of these documents.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important really to recognize, right, that it is a distinct block, right, but they are a minority. I would argue, though, that you look at some of the most influential figures in the founding of this nation and in, this whole process of the revolution, unfolding and playing out here, that most of the pivotal figures were Freemasons, right? Whether that's George Washington or Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Paul Revere, the Sons of Liberty, who, kicked off this, the war in many ways, right? Led to the spark that lit the fire there. Founded by Freemasons. So when we look at the role of Freemasonry in the revolution, it is really inseparable, right? And I know some people would try and push back that, the revolution's not Masonic because most of the people weren't Masons. Well, that's true, but you look at the people who were driving this, right, and driving the conflict. It was largely Freemasons, on both sides of the ocean there, the pond, as they say. The issue I really see with the founding at this point, right, is, you look at the Articles of Confederation, and it is very explicitly the government is instituted under God's authority, right? That, all the various states acknowledge and recognize that the ultimate sovereign is God, and that all power, temporal power on earth here, is therefore delegated, right? And so must be used responsibly. And that means there's guidelines around what can and cannot be done. And this is so huge, really, for proper governance and understanding, right, what that should even look like. Because if we don't acknowledge that the ultimate sovereign here is not mankind, right, the will of the people, but it is rather God who is the ultimate sovereign, and that anyone who exercises authority and power here on earth, right, that ultimately that is only because God has granted them that small measure of power. And this is, I see, really the core issue with the founding, is that idea was severed. And you look at the 13 colonies, every single one of them had laws against blasphemy, had religious requirements to be sworn in to the government, right? They can rightly be said to be Christian governments. And that is not the case under the Constitution. And in the treaty to Tripoli, right? The Barbary Pirates, the first war that America ever fought, not including the Revolutionary War, but the first war as a nation really that we fought was against the Barbary pirates, Muslim pirates. I've been doing this stuff for hundreds of years. And in that treaty, the Treaty of Tripoli, it is explicitly stated that the Constitution and the U.S. government is not a religious one and is not founded upon the Christian religion. Because this is one of the charges of the Muslim pirates, right? Is that, this is a Christian nation, we're waging jihad against you. And so it's explicitly acknowledged, no, our laws are not based off the Christian religion. This is not a religious government. And, I think the separation of church and state is something that we do see in the Old Testament, right? Priests are not also kings. There's a separation between the priestly caste, the sons of Levi, and the rulers of Judea, that being, Judah and his lineage, right? The Davidic kingdom. So there is that separation, but that doesn't mean that the government is totally divorced from religious obligations. And I think ultimately, even though governments will claim that, we're not founded upon a religion, our government is very much founded upon a religion, right? Ultimately, all governments are making religious claims that you have to believe these things, or we're we're going to enforce them. And for America, that is unquestionably the Masonic religion, right? That ultimately all religions are valid expressions, and all religions are pathways to reach God. I mean, this is one of the consistent claims of Freemasonry, is that, when it was initially founded in 1717, you had to be a Christian to be part of the lodge. But in about a decade, in 1726, that was removed. And anyone of any religion could join the Masonic lodge at that point. And so this has been a core claim of Freemasonry, is that all religions are in some way like shadows of this true religion, and are, kind of malformed expressions of that ancient and pure religion, but they're still valid ways to worship and come to God. Well, that is inherently a religious claim. The idea that all religions are of equal value in the public square, that is also a religious claim. So people can try and say, oh, it's not it is, right? When you're saying all the religions are valid and equal, that Satanism has as much a right to be in the public square as Christianity, that is a religious claim. And fundamentally, that is the Masonic religion. And so when people say, oh, there's no religion that, America is founded upon, I mean, I would really beg to disagree. I would beg to disagree here, because it's certainly not the Christian one, as the Treaty of Tripoli makes clear. Now, certainly there are Christian principles that inform the Constitution, and there are many of the founders who were indeed vociferous Christians. And I would say largely when they argued for freedom of religion, the only religion they had in mind was the Christian religion. And you can just look at the state laws basically to confirm that, right? I mean, the kind of stuff that we see on social media, the statements, against God routinely made. I mean, people, I think only like a handful of people were ever actually killed for, blasphemy in America before the Constitution. So it's a very small minority, but I mean, people went to jail for this kind of stuff, right? So the idea that, Satanism was within their purview for freedom of religion, I'm trying to use the most extreme example, right? Because this has, thanks to Trump, the Church of Satan is a recognized religious institution in America now. It's you can, tax exempt status and everything. So it's not just, hey, you can do what you want in the public square, but also there's all sorts of government benefits and, tax exemptions. There's a monetary incentive and assistance, essentially, that is being proffered to these organizations. So it's not just, hey, we're all hands off, right? I mean, there's a kind of, not even a tacit, but an explicit endorsement of these kinds of things as legitimate expressions. When we look at the founding and we look at so many of the influential presidents throughout history, 15 presidents, known Freemasons, I use that kind of wording very intentionally because there are many more that are suspected. And, you can just look throughout history of their associations and, the particularly unique Masonic hand signs and grips and handshakes and things of this sort that, it is induction, right? It's not, rock solid evidence. I will freely admit to that, right? But there's a lot of smoke for a lot more precedents than 15, that's for sure.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions on some of this, and I don't know if we can tie them together or not, but you said at the beginning all that the Freemasons are minority, but it seems like they have a lot of influence for being a minority when it comes to the state. Now, how does that happen? How do they, being a minority, how do they have so much influence on the state and even Christianity? Now, and then you go on to talk about Anton LaVey bringing in like the satanic church or satanic religion. Now, this topic to me, when I read your article, it wasn't shocking to me because I'm 100% convinced that, and this is according to Scripture, that governments are under the control of Satan. So it wasn't shocking to me. Now, people who kind of have a surface level understanding of that or don't really, or still kind of entangled with the state as a Christian, this type of article might shock them or might surprise them. So I'm kind of curious if you could tie those two together for me at all. And if not, then we can move on.
No, certainly. Well, here's the thing, right, is that Freemasonry has always kind of appealed to the elite class, the movers and shakers. And, according to John Quincy Adams, writing during the Morgan Affair, which was a really notorious scandal during the 19th century, it led to a suppression of Freemasonry in many of the states, definitely the lowest point of Freemasonry in American history. Now, eventually they would come back from this, in a limited way. But the Morgan Affair, William Morgan was a former Freemason. He threatened to expose the fraternity. And so he was kidnapped from jail on September 11th and was never seen again. And his murder, which some people attested to, this is all like in court documents. You look up the Morgan Affair and you read some of the Masonic accounts, and then you read actual firsthand and secondhand sources from the time period in which this was occurring. And it is like night and day. You're like being told two totally different stories, right? Two totally different realities. So, John Quincy Adams, there's a book, Letters and Addresses on Freemasonry, the 1875 edition. Highly recommend people read that. And John Quincy Adams would, he was kind of, amused by Freemasonry, was never a member. And it was not until the Morgan Affair that he really started digging into this and became one of Freemasonry's most outspoken critics. And so he is writing, in the 1820s here, and he says, speaking of Freemasonry, that they commanded a despotically large portion of the public press, intimidating by its terrors multitudes of others, and amid all its internal dissensions, uniting with the whole mass of its power against every common adversary. One of the most alarming and pernicious characters in which it now presents itself is that of its political dominion. And so the Morgan Affair was largely swept under the rug. Very few people who were involved in his kidnap. And there was over 70 individuals that we know of through like court proceedings and documents, at least 70 individuals that were a party to his kidnapping and his, shanghaiing from, I believe it was Pennsylvania, all the way to Canada eventually. This was largely covered up thanks to people like DeWitt Clinton, the then governor of New York, a former U.S. senator, and he was the high priest of the General Grand Chapter of the United States for the York Rite. So we have U.S. governors, we have Edward Livingston, the future Secretary of State, and at the time, the General Grand High Priest of the Royal Archmasons. Numerous high-level political figures throughout America, right? So it's like, how could such a small segment wield such inordinate power? Well, when you control the media and when you control, the executive branch of multiple states, and you are littered throughout the executive branch, judges, jurors, the legal system, the oaths that Freemasons swear are to be held in higher regard than their oaths to anything else. And this is why I would say all secret societies, but in particular Freemasonry, is inimical to a free and open society, because we cannot have public servants, supposed public servants, being beholden to oaths that are higher than their oaths to those whom they're supposed to serve. And this is what we see time and time again. Some Masons would dispute this, and they would say, it's not for murder and it's not for these other things. Well, it's only because of the Morgan Affair that those oaths changed, right? So now, currently, there are some of these stipulations that are made. Again, we see how, in actual practice, where those oaths are, how real those oaths are. But you look historically, right, at the Masonic oaths that people swore, and there was no stipulations around, not for crimes and not for this and not for that. Basically, the only stipulation is you are not to wrong or to come against a brother. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much the only stipulation, is that you are to prefer a brother Mason in all things. And that's one of the other issues here, right, is that once you have a Mason in government, well, then they are sworn by these oaths to prefer their brethren. And so they're going to, hey, there's a Freemason and there's a non-Freemason up for a position. Well, the Mason's going to hire the fellow Mason. And so it becomes really a self-perpetuating cycle, right? And so it's only when massive scandals like this break out And so many of the lower level Masons are so disgusted by what they see that there is any kind of defection from the fraternity.
Hey folks, we have set up a very simple way to donate to the Bad Roman Project through spotfund.com. Just go to SpotFund and search No King But Christ. Just $5 or $10 a month will go a long way in helping us keep this project going and continue spreading the very basic message of No King But Christ. So if you like what we were doing and can find it within your budget, go to spotfund.com and search No King But Christ, and you can set up monthly donations or even donate one time. Any and all donations help more than you know, and as always, any donations above production costs will go directly to charities in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank y'all so much. Now back to the show.
I want to talk about something too that this is strange to me, because you mentioned a little bit earlier about like their secret handshakes and their symbols and stuff, and you have a list of people in this article all the way from Joseph Stalin to Lady Gaga, which I found very interesting, and even Prince Harry's there, even Kid Cudi. Now, what's so strange to me about this is if people are aware of these signs and symbols and their handshakes and stuff, they openly do it in public. They're not even trying to hide it. Is it if it's a mystery, or if it's a secret society type thing, but they're doing this out in public? Why are they making it so public? Or are they just resting on the idea that the public is largely ignorant, like I am, to this topic?
I mean, that's really the reality.
It seems pretty bold. It seems pretty bold to me to do that openly like that if you're trying to keep it a secret.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's several aspects to it. So on the one hand, it really just does come down to hubris and pride, because the vast majority of the populace is indeed deeply ignorant of these kinds of things, right? And I mean, I read like in history books that people try and say that putting your hand in your breast pocket, rather, right, with your thumb sticking out, that this is just something that people did in the 19th century. It was just like a fashion trend. Like, no, this is a very well-known and common Masonic symbol, right? The hidden hand. You start looking at pictures of world leaders over the last 300 years, you're going to see it popping up pretty much everywhere. And so these secret societies bank on the ignorance of the population, of the masses, that they can openly flaunt these symbols and they have no idea what it means. I think the other major aspect of this as well is from a psychological and a spiritual perspective. So, we look at the Old Testament, and it's very interesting that, in regards to sexual assault, if a woman was in the city and she did not cry out, that silence was interpreted as consent. Because obviously, if this was something that, you did not want to happen and you're in the city surrounded by people, you would call out for help, right? And so to not call out for help then and to sit there in silence is tacit consent. And the same principle is, realized and utilized by the occultist. That if we show you openly these things, what we are doing to you, and you accept it, and you don't speak out against it, then you have accepted it, right? And from a psychological perspective, this is doubly powerful, right? Because it is essentially a type of learned helplessness where we can constantly be bombarded with these kinds of occult symbols and psychological operations. And no matter how vile, how evil the things about our government are revealed, the people continue to line up and to vote, and to pay their taxes and XYZ. So a part of it is power, right? That I can tell you what I'm going to do to you, and you're still going to accept it. Part of it is like a washing of guilt, right? And their perverse mindset that, hey, if I tell you what I'm going to do and you don't do anything about it, then I'm off the hook, basically, right? I mean, obviously, it's a very bizarre way of thinking, and for most common people, are going to be like, this is really, really absurd. And I know I believed that for a long time as well. But this is the mindset, so whether you think it's absurd, I mean, certainly there's a lot of this stuff that I think is absurd, but that's not really the question. The question is whether the people in power actually believe this, right? And I think their own actions demonstrate that they do.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the pagan symbols and monuments. And this is something that I know I've either watched on TV about, even like the symbols on the dollar bill you brought up earlier. I'd heard of stuff like that, or I'd seen something like that on TV, but I didn't think a whole lot about it. But you even went into detail about, like, even Capitol Hill was designed around what Thomas Jefferson was setting up and wanted built as far, and it all has Mason imagery to it. It's another thing to me that you said it's hubris. They're just it's making it known out loud that this is what it's about, and this is what we follow. It's strange to me that they're so open about it. I just, like, they're counting on people just to be ignorant and brush it off.
I mean, they've been open about it for hundreds of years, and people, continue to be in ignorance of it. It's, when people try and come back and say, oh, the Constitution, the founding, it's not Masonic, there were some Masons, but it's not Masonic. Okay, well, just look at the U.S. Capitol, right? It is littered with Masonic buildings, Masonic symbols, and explicitly so, right? So Capitol Hill is a great example because the name itself was intentionally selected by Thomas Jefferson as an homage to the Capitoline Hill. Now, this is one of the 7 hills of Rome, and it is where the temple of Jupiter, or Jupiter Optimus Maximus, it's where the temple to Jupiter was. So the Capitol Hill, not only is the name hearkening back to the temple of Jupiter here, but the Capitol building itself is explicitly modeled and was so by Jefferson. He was deeply involved in the architecture, not only the Capitol building, but the layout of DC in general. And so the rotunda is a carbon copy of the Greek pantheon. Of course, this is in ancient Greece where idols to all of the gods would be held. And the pantheon in Greece, the central point of the ceiling is, there's a big hole there, right, where the sun would shine through, because ultimately that is what they're all worshiping, right? That these are all different manifestations of the sun. I mean, sun worship is something that is very common in the mystery religion, and certainly Masonry has a lot of it as well. And so in the Capitol, in the rotunda, in place of the sun, is a picture that was placed there in 1865. It's called the Apotheosis of Washington. And apotheosis is a Greek word for becoming God. And so it is the divinization of Washington, essentially. It was painted by a Freemason, Constantino Bramudi. And I mean, I don't know how else to put it, right? I mean, it's just idolatry of the highest order. That we would intentionally model our government buildings after pagan altars and temples. And then in place of the sun, we would put George Washington seated on, Zeus's throne, surrounded by all the ancient Greek gods. I mean, just insanely staggering, right? The other Masonic symbolism, and there's so much. If you go to the article, I linked a Masonic piece detailing all the various symbols, but just one instance is the number of stars surrounding the picture, 72. Now, depending on your Bible translation, some place it at 70, some at 72 for the different tribes after the scattering of Babel, right? The Babelizing of languages. And so there are the 72 nations or peoples or languages, and that those 72 stars is a symbol for that, right? For the chaos that was unleashed, right, through the Babelizing of languages. And so whenever you see that 72 number or symbol, it is hearkening back to Babel and to that ancient great work that remains unfinished. As well, you look at the dollar bill, that great pyramid, the unfinished pyramid, it has 72 bricks, right? So this 72 number is extremely common throughout DC and is embedded to all sorts of our architecture, right? Another great example is, the Washington obelisk, right? The Washington Monument. Now, the obelisk itself is a very, it comes from Egypt, right? It adorned the Egyptian temples. Now, it represents the cycle of life and death because the obelisk is representative of the magical phallus of Osiris. I mean, very weird stuff, that these people believe in, but it is death and rebirth, right? through the rising and setting of the sun. But, it's not only that, it's also this phallic symbol for fertility. And so it's also the cycle of not just, night and day, but life and death. Again, there's a lot of duality within the Masonic religion, right? The dialectic between good and evil, light and dark, is very common within Masonic philosophy. And indeed, Hegel, who, if you've ever heard of the Hegelian dialectic, Hegel was deeply influenced by Adam Weishaupt, who was himself, not only the founder of the Illuminati, but also deeply influenced by previous Masonic thinkers, such as Immanuel Kant, Rousseau, etc. I mean, the Enlightenment is basically just a bunch of Freemason philosophers trying to attack and undermine Christianity. It is, really just quite obvious. And again, there's been a wealth of scholarly research on this subject. A good book on the topic, Perfectibilists by Terry Melanson. Excellent book. I mean, this is like a meticulously cited scholarly work on the subject, but he gets into more detail there. And so you look at some of the symbolism, not just of the obelisk itself, but the dimensions and measurements of the obelisk, right? So the amount of the obelisk that stands above the ground, well, the total height is 666.6 feet tall. Now, 555.5 of that is above ground. And when you break that down into inches, that's 6,666 inches. And then there is 111.1 feet that is beneath the ground. And so that, when you break it down to inches, is 1,333 or 1333 inches. Now, within Masonic symbolism, 13, 33, 11, 66, all of these have an extreme amount of significance, right? So depending on the occult tradition, they have different meanings, for the different symbols. But it is, whether it's Washington's monument, the Capitol building, I mean, just DC is littered with Masonic symbolism. And I would, say open declarations of the true nature of the American government.
I think everybody who looks at this topic or tries to learn anything about it, I think we've all heard about like the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. I know I have, but you pointed something out in the article that I was completely ignorant to. I never paid attention to, was the owl. What is the significance of the owl on the dollar bill?
Yeah, so if you look at the dollar bill, it is in the top right corner on the crest. Now, this is very small. If you're, elderly, you might need some glasses or something, right? I mean, this thing is like teeny, teeny, tiny.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'd never noticed it before until you pointed out the article.
Yeah, that was pointed out to me in my fraternity.
Okay.
So that's the only reason I know about it, because the owl was our symbol. And the owl has a ancient, symbolic tradition going back, right? Probably the most famous is the owl of Minerva. She's the Greek goddess of wisdom. And so the owl has been revered by occultists, for millennia, right? It is a symbol of wisdom. It is a symbol of knowledge. It has often been associated with witchcraft and sorcery in general, right? Not just hearkening back to, Minerva here, but the owl in general, viewed as wise, right? Why do we, view the owl as wise? Well, it's these kinds of associations, right? And often within these kinds of magical rituals is attempted to be invoked as a familiar of the spellcaster, right? A familiar is like a spirit or creature that is essentially, possessed or serves the spellcaster in some way.
That's interesting. Like I said, my eyes have gotten bad over the years, so it was hard for me to see. I would have never looked for it had you not said it and talked about it, and I did finally find it.
I mean, it is so small, right? Like I had to really zoom in to, for people to be able to see it. But yeah, I mean, if you're not looking for it, you would have no idea. And that's just one of the many symbols, the many Masonic symbols that are embedded into our currency.
It's so subtle, but so bold at the same time. Like they're just not, like I said, they're not even trying to hide it. But that's really what we get with government anymore anyways. It seems like these days, they don't even try to hide how insidious they are. So it's not, this all kind of goes together for me that, okay, they know nobody cares. They're going to keep propping us up and supporting us regardless, and we'll just keep them fighting with each other. They just openly talk about it. It's just out in the open now, and there's nobody cares. That's why I found this so interesting.
Indeed.
Spice up your day with a taste so fine. Bad Roman salsa gonna blow your mind through the maze of politics where people can't see. Homemade salsa gonna make you feel free. No king but Christ living in your soul. Bad Roman salsa helps the podcast grow. Pick up your Bible, put the politics down. Support the show with every bite and salsa with us through this crazy ride. Bad Roman salsa and no king but Christ. BadRomanSalsa.com, BadRomanSalsa.com. Grab a jar, try a bite. Back to the show and back to Christ.
All right, so I want to kind of talk. You mentioned the article. How does this all point towards their allegiance to Lucifer? Now, like I said earlier, I'm convinced that governments are under control of Satan. We see it in the temptation of Christ in the Bible. Now, let's talk about how this points to their allegiance to Lucifer, because this is one thing that's so frustrating to me when I talk to Christians, and you can point clearly to them how evil empire is, and yet Christians will still support it because it's tribalism, statism, whatever you want to call it. And it'll kind of lead into my last question for you on the show. Let's kind of talk about their allegiance to Lucifer.
Yeah, so you have to really kind of dig deep into the Masonic literature here. So there's several very famous quotes, in particular by Albert Pike, where he acknowledges that the energies of Lucifer is like the Holy Spirit, it's the Paraclete, right? And that this is this knowledge or wisdom that it shines forth on man. I mean, it's like a very Gnostic notion, frankly. And you see Lucifer within Masonic literature embodied as this kind of intellectual principle. Now, and this is in, kind of the more mainstream Masonic literature. Now, Lucifer is Latin for light bearer. And I would argue ultimately, right, the true light is Christ. I mean, that's the point that John makes in the first gospel, right? That the true light is the word, which was made flesh, which is Christ. And that this is the true light, he says in chapter 1, verse 9, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. And, it's very interesting. You look at the Genesis account, and it's not until day 4 that the sun, moon, and stars are created. And yet from day 1, there is light. Well, what is that light when there's no sun? I would argue, right, as scripture reveals for us, that light was, Christ, his glory shining forth upon creation. And this is why we see in Revelation that eventually there will be no more sun. And the light of the Son and the light of the Father will shine forth upon all of creation, like it did in the beginning. So just that right off the bat, when the Masons say, and in their oaths, right, for the Master Mason oath, it says, after they swear all these grisly oaths, they say, you will detach your hands and kiss the book, which the Bible or the Quran or whatever book you want it to be. In your present condition, what do you most desire? And then the candidate says, further light in Masonry. Now, I don't know about you, right? But I don't know how any Christian can swear that kind of oath. That what do you most desire? Not Christ, but the further light in Masonry, this false enlightenment, this false light. And so, this is one of the many, in Revelation, Jesus is called the morning star. And I believe that Satan has also usurped this title from Christ, right? That he is the light bringer. And this is why ultimately Christ reclaims that title in Revelation that, no, I am the morning star. I am the one that shines light and knowledge and truth upon creation, not, Satan. And so it is this light, this false knowledge that Masons all strive for, that they are trying to gain more of. And I think it's very revealing, not just in the writings of Pike and, these other esotericists, but there is a book called The Builders by Joseph Ford Newton, very famous Freemason, and still widely recommended by Freemasons. This is one of the books that you should read to become a better Mason. You can find this in magazines, distributed by reading lists, all these distributed by the Grand Lodge. So this is a book that is still endorsed, still in use by Freemasons, right? And on page 57 of that book, Newton gives a glowing endorsement of one of his fellow occultists. He says, quote, "Perhaps the greatest student in this field of esoteric teaching and method, certainly the greatest now living, is Arthur Edward Waite, to whom it is a pleasure to pay tribute." And then a couple pages later, he continues, "And the result is a series of volumes, noble in form, united in aim, unique in wealth of revealing beauty, and of unequaled worth. Beginning as far back as 1886, Waite issued his study of the mysteries of magic, a digest of the writings of Eliphas Levi, to whom Albert Pike was more indebted than he let us know." Now, Arthur Edward Waite and Levi are both like notorious occultists, right, in the history of this, kind of thought and philosophy. And on page 428 of Mysteries of Magic by Arthur Edward Waite, this same book, right, that Joseph Fort Newton says is an amazing book, and Albert Pike actually got a bunch of his philosophy from this. This is what he says on the Mysteries of Magic, a book that we're told again that Masons should read to become better Masons. Quote, "What is more absurd and more impious than to attribute the name of Lucifer to the devil, that is, to personified evil? The intellectual Lucifer is the spirit of intelligence and love. It is the Paraclete, it is the Holy Spirit, while the physical Lucifer is the great agent of universal magnetism." So I've used Lucifer in kind of two senses here. Now, in one of his later books, the Book of Black Magic, and I won't read it because it is a legitimate invocation to Lucifer, not like the intellectual Lucifer. But he says, "First conjuration addressed to Emperor Lucifer, master and prince of rebellious spirits," et cetera, et cetera. So very clear here that we're not talking about, some kind of intellectual principle, but we're talking about the being, the person of Lucifer, right? And he says that this is absurd to attribute this to the devil or personified evil. Well, in the Gnostic mythology, which Freemasonry gets, much of its mythology from, even in a veiled form, well, it is Yahweh who is viewed as the evil God, right? The demiurge. And he is the one who created the material realm. Again, in the Gnostic conception, material is viewed as inherently evil. And so this is why you get some of these strange notions throughout church history, right? Like Docetism, that Jesus wasn't actually, embodied, that his physical form was an illusion, essentially, because God cannot inhabit, the physical or material realm, right? The material realm is evil. Again, a lot of this is from Plato, who himself got all this from the Egyptians, right? So he openly acknowledges that he's been inducted into the mysteries in some of his dialogues, and he encourages his interlocutor to stay behind with him so that he can also be inducted into the mystery religion. So I think it's very clear, frankly, from the Masonic literature that they promote, that they endorse, that Lucifer is not viewed as evil, and in fact is, almost a paragon or a role model in many ways, right? And I don't think it's an accident that you look throughout world history, in particular, particularly over the last 300 years, how so many of the world revolutions, whether it's the British or the French or the American, the Haitian, the Mexican, the Japanese, the Italian, I could go on and on and on. Right? I mean, those are just the countries that I've covered in my own writings, right? Again, documented, I'm not pulling from conspiracy texts. I'm pulling from mainline history books, academic journals, scholarly writings. And this is just, the evidence is overwhelming, frankly, absolutely overwhelming. So it's no accident that, the foot soldiers of Lucifer are behind so many of the world revolutions and chaos and dissension that we've seen play out over the last, 300 years. And I use that kind of marker, right? Because 1717 is the founding of the United Grand Lodge of England. And when the Freemasons claim, although I, highly dispute that, right? But they claim that this is when the Masonic religion was revivified.
All right. I said I've got one question for you, but I've got two. I want to tie them together, and then we'll close up.
Yep.
Now, is there still the amount of influence on the U.S. government today like there was before from Freemasonry as far as politicians go? And what would you say to someone who wants to make government more righteous? And I've heard this specific thing from Christians who feel the need to work through the state, work and try to make the government more Christian.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to somebody like that? If we can kind of tie those together, I'll get you to plug your stuff and let you get on with your day.
Certainly. No, yeah. I mean, that is a I'll answer the first part, right? Freemasonry as an institution has largely gone out of vogue. There's other occult groups that have kind of taken their place. They're not totally out of the picture, but I would argue stuff like the OTO have largely replaced what Freemasonry was during the 18th and 19th century. So because of the Morgan affair and because of a lot of the history that's been done on them, their role, I think, has minimized somewhat. I mean, you have a lot of secular institutions now, right, like the CFR or the World Economic Forum, again, that play very similar roles and are doing the kind of talent scouting, as I put it, that the Freemasons used to do, right? So as the world has grown more secular and more irreligious, a lot of the religious pageantry around these institutions has been, eschewed, and it has largely become secularized. Now, I say that, and yet there are still Masonic institutions that have an enormous amount of power, such as B'nai B'rith, which is the Jewish exclusive sect of Freemasonry. And one of their organizations, most people have probably heard of it, the ADL, or the Anti-Defamation League. Well, the full title is the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, right? So there's absolutely still many ways in which the Masonic institution influences government. And that's why I try and use the term mystery religion as more of a catch-all term, because there are many people who would be part of the mystery religion, but are not necessarily a card-carrying Freemason, right? That's one of the reasons why I try and use that term. Now, as far as trying to make the government more righteous, I think that's a noble impulse. But ultimately, and particularly when it comes to Freemasons and these kinds of secret societies, this is what I'll say to any Christian, is that these are just utterly inimical to the teachings of Christ. And I mean, we just, right? I read that oath. I don't know how any Christian can say what they most desire is, further esoteric teachings and Masonry and not Christ, which the scriptures reveal is the true light, right? He is the truth. I mean, not just the true light, but he is the truth, the embodiment of truth. And so when we say, hey, we're looking for the truth, not in the conspiracy realm, right? I know a lot of people say, we're truth seekers, right? Well, if you are a truth seeker, then you'll be seeking after Christ, right? I mean, that's the way that the scriptures present it. And so the idea that we can seek the truth apart from Christ or divorce from Christ is unchristian. It is anti-Christian, frankly. Not only is there that issue, I think the issue of swearing oaths in general is also, disallowed by the scriptures. So Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, says that you're not to swear at all, neither by heaven, nor by God's throne, by the Jerusalem, right? Nor by the earth, nor by his footstool. I mean, you're not to swear by any of these things, right? Let your yea be yea, and let your nay be nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. And, one of the very common defenses that Freemasons and Christian Freemasons will try and present, right, is that, hey, but we do good stuff. And, I just want to join the Freemasons because I want to do charity work. Okay, well, go do charity with your church, right? Go start a ministry. I mean, there's there's so much. I mean, this country is like falling apart, Go help some orphans. I mean, go do something. You don't need to be a Freemason and waste all your time learning all this crap. I mean, it's crazy how much stuff you have to read. And you have to memorize all these rituals. I mean, it's not like you get like a script to go through, right? You have to fully memorize this ritual before you can ever be inducted to the next level. So there's so much stuff you got to learn. And, this is what St. Paul says, in his second epistle to the Corinthians, chapter 11, verses 13 through 15. He says, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing. Oh, interesting. That light showing up again, huh? Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness. So we are told, we are warned even, that these false apostles, false teachers, deceitful workers, they are called, will present themselves in a noble way, right? Oh, I mean, not very many people are going to fall for the whole, the horns and the pitchfork routine. But when he comes, as an angel of light, right? I'm here to give you wisdom and knowledge and to free you. Well, then, hey, it's okay if I join and, do some of these, because I'm doing nice things, right? Even though I may be doing some bad things, I'm doing some nice things. Well, this is precisely what we're warned about in Scripture, is the method in which the workers of Satan will try and hide themselves, right? And elsewhere in his second epistle to Timothy, he warns Timothy that those who have a form of godliness but deny the power, right? Deny the power of the Holy Spirit, from such turn away. So we're to avoid these people. We're to avoid these kind of associations where, people will try and live holy and righteous lives, right? But try and do it separately from Christ, or as the Masons, openly acknowledge and teach, that we can somehow become gods, that we can attain immortality. I mean, this is that unfinished pyramid, right? I mean, that is an alchemical symbol originally for the great work, for the divinizing of humanity. Again, the ancient rebellion. So, Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, that which shall be, which has been, shall be again. And truly, the more I look at, history, the more I study history, the more I realize, right, that, you learn from studying history that we don't learn from history. And these things kind of play out over and over again. I mean, I think it's a noble impulse to try and right government and to try and get it more in line with what the Scriptures reveal. It is a necessary evil in many ways, right? If we were all perfect individuals, if there was no sin, if there was no evil, then we would not need government. And this is actually the aim of the Illuminati, is that through, mankind reaching and attaining this moral perfection, that there would be no need for human government anymore. And so it's only because of sin and evil that these kinds of things are necessary. The idea that we would divorce our government and divorce our laws from the knowledge and the wisdom of God, well, I mean, we have seen the folly of that, and we were living the folly of that, right? That, every expression of, worship, of religion, of what have you, that it's all equally valid. The Satanist, the Christian, these are all valid expressions in the public square. That is, I think, one of the most pernicious lies that we have been sold. And it is it is an Enlightenment ideal. You do not see this play out, for the vast majority of Christendom. Indeed, you look at the Christian colonies, right? And this idea would have been unheard of in many of them. It's only through really the anesthetizing, I would say, of the Christian conscience toward this kind of open idolatry in the public square. I mean, it's just, one of the examples that immediately comes to mind is like Gideon, who tears down his father's own pagan temple and burns it, right? Burns it down and offers a sacrifice to Yahweh. I mean, we have the best kings of Israel, I'm forgetting the name right now, but it was the one who tore down the high places, who tore down these pagan temples. I mean, the idea that, those people, they just worship on the high places, right? That's their religion. We got to live and let live. Worship children to Baal or sacrifice children to Baal and the rest of it. That's just their religion. We got to, we have to tolerate them. I mean, I don't know where people find this idea in the Bible. I certainly can't find it in mine. That doesn't mean we're like to compel people to convert at the edge of the sword. I think that's also equally evil, right? But when there's a difference between that and allowing these kinds of things, the free reign of idolatry and paganism within the public square, and a deeply unchristian notion. So if we are to ever right the ship, then, and I'm speaking, to Christians now, right? Then we must acknowledge this, that we cannot just allow paganism and idolatry into the public square and think that God is going to bless our endeavors. And I think the last 300 years certainly has shown us that the more and more we get divorced from these biblical truths and understandings, the worse that our civilizations get. I mean, just example after example of this in the Old Testament, you think as well, right? For the Passover or for the Sabbath days, where, the non-believers, right? You didn't have to worship, but you weren't allowed to work. You weren't allowed to go out and do these things. Even the foreigners, people traveling, in the land. Nehemiah, famous instance where traders were trying to come to Jerusalem and basically entice, the Hebrews to break the Sabbath. And Nehemiah threatens them, says, if you come here again, I will lay hands upon you. So the idea then, right, that you don't have to worship our religion if you're in our country, right? We can't force you to do that. You can't police the idols that men set up in their hearts, but you're not going to induce these other people to do it either, right? I think that's ultimately what's been impressed upon me, and what I've kind of gleaned from so much of my studies is that some of these notions that we talk about as American, right? Well, they may be American, but they're certainly not Christian.
Well, this has been fascinating, Scipio, and I feel like we could go on for hours talking about all this stuff. And I know you've done quite a bit of work on the topic, and I want people listening to go find your work and reach out to you if they have more questions as well. But where can people find you at? And it will plug whatever you want to plug, and we'll have it in the show notes as well. And I'll let you get out of here. Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Let me share a little bit of the wisdom I've gleaned here. I really just implore people to read, right? Read. Don't take my word for it. It's one of the things I always say. This is why I cite all my work. I mean, vociferously rather. It's very much my methodology. I was saying, when we were talking a little bit before the show, that I really wasn't like a conspiracy theory, quote unquote, type person. I thought a lot of these things were absurd. And that's only because I was deeply ignorant of the subject, frankly, right? And once you start researching and you start actually looking into this stuff, I mean, it is just a mountain of evidence, and particularly for, the Masonic conspiracy, right? Which indeed is not a theory, but is a felony. And so, my work, I have so many different series, right? We got Anatomy of a Revolution, all about the French Revolution, the role that Masonry played in it. I write a bit about biblical cosmology, creation. That's certainly one of my passions. The transhumanism, false flags, Judeo-Christian paradox, Mystery Babylon, which encompasses all of the work that I've done on Freemasonry and its various different tentacles and expressions. I mean, we've done essays on, again, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the Meiji Revolution in Japan, the Mexican Revolution. I mean, it's just on and on and on. These people keep showing up. Quite a bit about philosophy, scripture. I'm a bit of a Renaissance man. I have a varied interest in topics. I like to write about, a variety of things. And so there is a little bit of something for everyone, certainly there. So if you go to Dispatches from Reality, and that's dfreality.substack.com, you can find my work. I do, weekly news roundups, the week in review. Just a ton of stuff there for people to dig through and go through and, and really, right, like examine the evidence for yourself, Don't take my word for it. That's fantastic. That's great. I mean, it's so everything can be found at that one website then.
Yep, that is my primary. All my work is primarily there at Substack. Now, I am also on Spotify. I'm on iTunes. We have a podcast, YouTube. I'm trying to pump the YouTube more, actually. So definitely go to the YouTube, subscribe there. I have tons of archival documentaries, long form essays. It's the same thing, Dispatches from Reality. So if you just look up Dispatches from Reality, you'll be able to find us on, all the, whatever is your preferred platform or method of viewing, media content, right? All the essays, all the written works are at Substack.
Awesome. Well, I want to get you back on sometime. I've enjoyed listening to you teach us a little bit, and I'm sure there's more that you could share with us as well. So if you're interested in coming back on the show sometime, let me know if you've got anything. Thank you. I'm gonna let you get out here and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.
No king but one, and his kingdom is not of this world. Rather serve God than humans. So what are you doing? You over there clutching your pearls. Conservative, liberal, or in the middle. If you belong to Christ, you know it is pitiful. Demons controlling the state, it is pivotal, biblical. We will not bow to the enemy. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, Failed kingdoms. The Bad Roman Project. Let's go.